Our ninth lesson is from the Gospel according to John, chapter 1, verses 1 to 14. Listen now to the word of the Lord. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through Him, and without Him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in Him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory as the glory of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. My wife and I have been watching a series lately on HBO called True Detective. Now, I'm going to warn you, this series is not for the faint of heart. It has lots of subject matters that are, to say, difficult to watch sometimes. So I'm not recommending that you go out and watch True Detective. Okay, it's not my endorsement here. However, there was something interesting they mentioned in one of the episodes we were watching. The show features two detectives. One was named Detective Cole, who was played by Matthew McConaughey, and he was a hard-bitten, cynical detective. He had had some awful tragedies in his life and was eaten up by alcohol and bitterness. In the last episode of the first season, he had a near-death encounter. And after a long recovery in a hospital, he's sitting with another detective outside in the night looking up at the stars. And they had just solved this horrific and brutal crime. And Detective Cole was coming to terms with this and all the past issues that he had faced. And the two men were looking up at the night sky, and they were looking at the stars, how they filled it up with light. But one of them noticed that there was a lot more dark than light. And they're looking up at the sky, the night sky, and they're thinking of it as this war of light and dark. And one detective says it looks like the dark's winning. Because if you look up in the night sky, it does look like there's a lot more darkness than there is light. It feels like that sometimes, that the dark is winning. This year, it's felt like that to a many. This year, if you're keeping a tally on which years the light wins and which years the dark wins, you might be tempted to look at 2020 and just chalk this one up to the dark and say, they got this year. I mean, we had, of course, COVID-19. We had riots. We had cities occupied. We had an international lockdown. We had a nasty, bitter, and contested election. We've had mistrust and hatred. We've had claims of conspiracy on both sides of the aisle. We've had a fight over mask or no mask. Churches shut down. Empty stadiums for baseball games. We almost didn't have football. We were really close to having no football at all. Crime has doubled in some of the bigger cities in America. Businesses are closing at a record pace. There's high unemployment. Some people calling for the dismantling of the police departments. We have mobs knocking over statues. And to top it all off, we almost ran out of toilet paper. Most will say 2020 was a bad year. It's worse for some than for others. But I don't think it was great for anybody. I don't think anyone's going to say, yeah, I want to do that one again. This was a good one. Let's do 2020 all over. may seem like the dark is winning, that the dark had an upper hand this year, but let me give you another take on 2020. And I want to remind you of something that was said in the movie Apollo 13. If y'all have seen that, it's a wonderful movie that tells the story of the moon mission that became an absolute disaster. When the Apollo 13 aircraft was in space, there was a routine stirring of the oxygen tanks that exploded and became one of the first of many, many problems that the crew faced. Many Americans, many people across the world, even a lot in NASA, did not think the crew was going to make it back alive. But back on Earth in flight control, the flight director, a man by the name of Gene Kranz, was leading the engineers and the teams to try to get the crew back to Earth safely. But at one point, we're in this big room with all the controls. The NASA director comes in and says, "This could be the worst disaster in the history of NASA." At that point, Gene Kranz replies, "With all due respect, sir, this is going to be our finest hour." And what he meant by that was disasters, in those times of disasters, is when we have a chance to prove ourselves, to rise above it, and to truly show our mettle. A lot of bad things did happen this year. A lot of terrible things happened. A lot of reason to fear for the future. But I believe that looking back, 2020 could be one of our finest moments. When you face a bad situation, one or two things can happen. It can break you, or it can prove that you have what it takes to overcome. There's an old proverb that says, "Calm waters never made a skilled sailor." See, it's sailing in the rough waters and the choppy waters. It's sailing through the storms that gives you your skill as a sailor. And if 2020 has been a storm, well, we can at least say it has made us all skilled sailors. The story of Christmas, the story that we have been reading about today, is the story of light and dark. It sums it up in John chapter 1. The light shined out in the darkness, but the darkness did not overcome it. And it's not just the story in John, it's the story we see played out over and over and over again through the Bible. We see the world made good by God, but then now it's fallen into darkness and sin. We see it having to be destroyed and cleansed by the flood and then falling into sin again. We see sin continuing to take over the world. And it grows until there's only one small group of God's people left. And then they themselves are taken and sold into slavery by the Babylonians. And in the midst of the worst possible time for God's people, a prophecy comes. The people who walked in darkness shall see a great light. A virgin conceives. She bears a child and calls him Jesus, for he is going to save his people from their sins. His birth is heralded by a star. It is announced by angels. That's the day that the light came into the world. It is the day that the light walked among us. This is the story of Christmas. This is the story of the light overcoming the dark. And we all know it. We've heard the story. Most of us are quite familiar with it. We know all the characters and the part they've played in it. There's Mary and Joseph. Mary sitting on the donkey and Joseph leading it at the night to Bethlehem. We know about the shepherds hearing the call of the angels. The wise men following the star from the east. And of course, baby Jesus wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in the manger. We all hear the story every year. We're quite familiar with it. But something about this story we don't usually hear. The story isn't finished yet. The Christmas story isn't done. The Christmas story actually goes on. It's still a story of the light overcoming the dark, but now it features a whole new cast of characters. you and me. It's still the story of Christmas, but now this is our part of the story. Now we are in the world surrounded by the dark. Now we are the ones to bear the light into the world. Now we are the light. Jesus once said, I am the light of the world. And then again he said to his disciples, you are the light of the world. How, you may ask, is it both? Well, he is the light, the eternal light, the original light, the one from the beginning, the one that shined out in the darkness. And we, as his disciples, we bear the light in us. It's the light of Christ. The light of Christ in you. The light of Christ in me. The light of Christ in all disciples of Jesus. It began first on that Christmas day. Jesus, the light of the world, had come into the world, and then he passed that light on to his disciples, and they passed it on to their disciples. And for 2,000 years, it's been passed on from teacher to teacher, disciple to disciple, until it comes to us. It's like a candle lit off of one flame, passed to another, and passed to another, until now the light is in you. It's our story now. It's your story. This is our moment in history. This is our chapter in the story of Christmas. And this is not a chapter where the darkness claims victory over the light, despite what the year might be, despite what the culture might threaten. No, this is a year where the light shines brighter. Because this is the year that the work of God continued on despite the hardships that we have faced. This is the year that people kept gathering to worship, even though there was a danger in coming to gather to worship. This was the year that the church adapted. And for those that weren't able to come, the church found ways to stream and to get the worship service into the house of people that couldn't attend. This is the year when you still gave generously, even though we were facing financial hardship and uncertainty. This is the year where we still acted like neighbors, even when some neighborhoods were being burned down. This is the year when we acted in Christian love and charity, even as our nation became more divided. This is the year where we still were bearing the light into the world, even though the darkness threatened. No, I believe this will be a defining moment for the church. And this will be a defining moment for our nation. Whatever happens, whatever follows, whatever they do politically or socially or even economically, none of these things can affect the progress and the march of the light in the world. There is no danger, there is no threat, there is no war, no famine, no plague, there is no ruin, no tyranny, there is no power in heaven and hell or on earth that can stop the progress of the light in the world. The darkness is helpless to stop the light. Because the darker it gets, the brighter the light becomes. Go take a candle out in a field in the middle of the day and you can hardly notice it. Take a candle out in the field at sunset and it starts to shine a little bit. Take it out at midnight and it's a great beacon you can see from thousands of feet away. But take it to a cave that has pitch black darkness, and that little candle can become blinding. As the dark gets darker, the light gets brighter. And the only way the dark can win is if you and I refuse to be the light anymore. Even death cannot stop us from being the light. And the world, the world has tried that already. They killed the martyrs, they killed the apostles, and they tried to kill the light by killing Christ, and that backfired colossally on them. As long as we continue to be the light, the darkness will never win. You know, what I like about that scene from True Detective is how they talk about the dark and the light. Detective Cole is sitting there with his partner, and they're looking at the stars, and there's so much night, there's so much darkness, there's only a few spots of light in the sky. And one remarks, it looks like the dark is winning. We've got more dark than stars. But Detective Cole looks at him and says, you got it all wrong. You think the dark's winning. It might look like the dark is winning, but you got to remember this. When it all got started, there was nothing but dark. The light is winning. The story of Christmas is our story now. It continues in this generation, and it will continue in the generation that comes after us. And it will keep continuing until Christ comes back and claims His victory complete. Go therefore, my friends, and bear the light. Proclaim the light, witness to the light, be the light. For the glory of your Savior, Jesus Christ, it shines in you. To God be the glory forever and ever. Amen.